Hey you guys, Erin here. I am back with another moon update for you. Today we're going to be talking about the full super moon we have coming up here in the exalted sign of Taurus, 24 degrees Taurus. This is taking place on Friday, November 15th. It peaks at 1:28 p.m. Pacific time. And this is really, I think this is our fourth super moon in a row, and it's really strong conjunct Uranus. So there's a lot to be said about this full moon. Not only that, but this full moon is basically, well, to the degree conjunct Donald Trump's midheaven, which that is the part that rolls over the career and authority in the world. So some really, really interesting stuff going on with this full moon. What I'm going to do in this recording is I'm going to break down how we can really benefit and flow through this energy. Because this is, I say this with confidence. We are headed into some very wild times. I promise you I'm be putting a video out here soon of how Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all change zodiac signs basically within a few months of each other. And that is just something that doesn't happen very often. So we're going to put some emphasis on that. But how we're going to flow through this full moon, really strong energy coming through. Of course, it's a full moon. So it's a time to honor our growth that's related to this sign of Taurus. Be thinking about, how have I grown in these ways that are related to the sign of Taurus over the last 6 months? And since we had the new moon in the sign of Taurus, this is also a time to be thinking about, maybe you want to let some of this Taurus energy go that's not serving you in your life. So I'll break down the sign of Taurus for you in detail. Of course, I'll pull up the chart and we'll go through some pretty interesting aspects that we will be receiving at the time of this full moon. And of course, I will also be talking about certain parts of the body that are ruled by this sign of Taurus, because we want to pay a little extra attention to these parts of our body during this kind of transit. Really, anytime anything up in the sky transits through the sign of Taurus, then these parts of our body become sensitized. But it's really a pretty big deal when it's a full super moon conjunct Uranus. So of course, I'll be mentioning some potential herbal and just overall remedies to help support these parts of our body during this kind of transit. And I will also be talking about gemstones that resonate well with the sign of Taurus. As many of you know, I don't mean to get repetitive here, but in case there's some new people here, every single full moon since 2016, I've been pulling out my journal. I write down the growth that I'm grateful for that's related to the sign the full moon is transiting through. And I write down what I want to let go of that's related to that zodiac sign. If you're somewhat familiar with your natal chart, or if you've had a reading with me, you can go back to review that to see which area of your life this specifically manifests for you. Maybe you've got something near 24 degrees Taurus, or maybe opposing that at 24 degrees Scorpio, or maybe trining that at 24 degrees Virgo or Capricorn. There's all kinds of things that can be applied to our own natal chart. But of course, if that's too much for you, of course, not everybody's got time to sit down and study their own natal chart. If that's too much for you, don't worry about it. Just take a step back and focus on the sign of Taurus in and of itself. Okay, so the sign of Taurus, this is what we call the fixed earth sign. When I say fixed, what I'm talking about is this ability to get into a rhythm and stick with it. The fixed signs don't like to be bouncing all over the place, okay? Now, also, the sign of Taurus, being an earth sign, really all the earth signs. If you think about the elements in Western astrology, earth, air, water, fire, earth is the most dense. It's the most stable, okay? Now, so this being the fixed earth sign, this is really like the most steadfast sign of the zodiac. It's really kind of like the calmest sign of the zodiac. Does that mean everybody who's a Taurus is going to be super calm? Absolutely not, because there's so much more to the natal chart. I'm thinking of a certain client right now who's a Taurus Aquarius rising and is not exactly the most calm person in the world, but she's hilarious and fun. But the sign of Taurus in and of itself, being that fixed earth sign, it wants things to be slow and steady, okay? It's ruled by Venus. Venus is most commonly recognized as the planet of love, because Venus influences love, harmony, calmness, patience. Venus is almost a remedy for everything. Maybe not a sugar addiction, but Venus, because she rules sweets and sugar, but Venus overall likes things to be lovely. The sign of Taurus can be so lovely and quite sensual. Okay, this is a very magnetic energy. When we think about the sign of Taurus being opposite the sign of Scorpio, these signs are said to be the most magnetic signs of the zodiac. People are drawn to this kind of energy. And if I'm being totally honest, for myself, any time in my life where I have been going through something that's emotionally turbulent, I very intentionally, I mean, as long as I've known about astrology, very intentionally reached out to my Taurus friends because they want to, especially moon in Taurus, because they don't want to get emotionally, overwhelmed. They want to think about things calmly, rationally, practically. And with that calmness, that Venusian Venus calmness. Okay, now the sign of Taurus, it's represented by the bull. Okay, the bull that does not want to budge. Okay, a very strong energy. And in fact, the sign of Taurus tends to have incredible vitality because they can hold energy in. Okay, again, being fixed earth. Now, also, I'm just going to put this out there right now. The sign of Taurus is very much the sign of money and finances and the value of working hard to be able to have that income coming in so we can buy the things we like, so we can live more comfortably. So it's very much the sign that's most directly associated with money and finances. And there's this giant statue of a bull in New York. It's somewhere, wherever they do the stock market exchanges. I'm not super up to par on that sort of thing, but it's that representation of the bull, the sign of Taurus. Okay, the motto for the sign of Taurus is I possess. Okay, and it's not like, when I say possess, I don't mean like, oh, I'm possessed by something. It's rather what you materially possess. A lot of people who've got a strong Taurus energy in their natal chart, they really will. I used to work for a Taurus, and I noticed that she, really liked the nice material things in her home. I mean, you would seem to think that everybody is like that, but certainly not everybody. The sign of Taurus understands, like, if we work hard in this world, we can be able to obtain, some sort of a, income, currency of income, so that we can go out and spend money on something that we get to materially possess, that we get to call our own. Okay, it's like the sign of material possessions. So how have you grown in these ways? Not only that, but the sign of Taurus, really all the earth signs can be associated with things like agriculture, things that are, grow out of the earth. When the moon is especially waning through the sign of Taurus, tends to be a really good time to plant like root vegetables, things like carrots and radishes and that sort of thing, because this comes from the earth. Okay, now maybe some of you out there have been really working on getting your hands into the soil, actually working with the earth, that sort of thing. But overall, there's so many things that could be, when we think about this sign of Taurus, there's so many things that we can relate it to and say, how have I grown in these ways? And you're hearing from somebody right now who almost the first half of my adult life, until I was like 34 years old, I was so funny. I was like, I want to learn to live without money. I just wanted to be a free spirit. I didn't want to be caught up in material things at all. And if I'm being totally honest, I kind of manifested myself broke. And then all of a sudden, I started, some of you guys will understand what I'm talking about here. Some of you won't. If you don't, that's okay. I started progressing. A lot of my planets and celestial bodies started progressing through the sign of Taurus. It was really like the first year that my sun started progressing through the sign of Taurus that all of a sudden, I started realizing, like, hey, wait a minute here. If I actually apply myself to something that I love to do, but it's still work, I'm still being of service. And really one of the first things I did was go work with agriculture, which is very interesting to think about. And then being able to live a little more comfortably. Okay. Now, with that said, we all have different levels of that kind of understanding, but that is something I feel is kind of important in this world. We live in this very physical, material world. And I do feel like we can all benefit from, putting a little bit of work into the world and applying ourselves into something that contributes to the world being a better place. And then we receive that return so that we can live more comfortably. So how have you grown in these ways? Not only that, but the sign of Taurus is also very strongly associated with food. I'll put this out there right now. The sign of Taurus rules the taste buds. Okay. And a lot of people who have their sun in Taurus or moon in Taurus tend to really enjoy food. Okay. And as long as you're eating healthfully, then that is a beautiful thing to understand the value of really good food, food that's good for us, food that was grown organically, food that we grew ourselves, that sort of thing. So maybe that's something that you've grown into to appreciate and to value. Okay. Or maybe you finally were able to get that new car or whatever it is. You finally were able to make that purchase. This is very much a time to honor that growth. But on the flip side of that, is there anything that, because trust me, I have plenty of clients who've actually like completely admitted to me that they have a tendency to get too wrapped up in the material things. Okay. If that's the case, I mean, the last thing we want is to be greedy. Okay. Not to say that the sign of Taurus is necessarily directly associated with greed. There's other things in astrology that can be associated with greed. Taurus isn't really one of them, but maybe you've been eating too much. Maybe you've been buying too much. Maybe you've even been working too much, that sort of thing. If that's the case, you might want to set the intentions to let some of that go. And again, this has got to be coming through somewhere in your natal chart. Even if you don't have any planets in the sign of Taurus, it's still somewhere in your natal chart. It could be coming through your house of relationships, your house of money, your house of self. If you're Taurus rising, it could be coming through your house of career, your house of communication. It has to be coming through somewhere in your natal chart. And it is, in my opinion, once we get a little bit comfortable with figuring this stuff out for ourselves, it really does make a pretty big difference. But again, if that's too much for you, don't worry about it. Just focus on the sign of Taurus in and of itself. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull up the chart here and start going through some of these placements for this full moon. So again, this is on Friday, November 15th. It peaks at 1:28 p.m. Pacific time. You might want to see what time this takes place in your location, especially with this kind of full moon, and I'll explain to you why. But really, okay, going back to why I like to pay attention to what time it really, is in its fullest form, is because I like to pull out my journal in the hours leading up to the full moon. Of course, if the full moon is at like 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm not going to wake up at midnight to write in my journal. But if it's in the wee hours in the morning, I'll usually journal the night before. For myself, this is at 1:28 p.m. Pacific time. So that Friday morning, I'll be pulling out my journal, the hours leading up to that full moon. Okay, so first of all, anytime we have a full moon, it means the sun and the moon are exactly opposite each other. Okay, so here we have the sun at 24 degrees Scorpio. Happy solar return season to all you Scorpios out there. I sure do love you guys. And then here's the moon at 24 degrees Taurus, exactly opposite each other. Now, what's going on here? And by the way, that's really in part why full moons are such a big deal. And keep in mind, this is a super moon. Okay, so it's just overall stronger. We receive that energy with more density, really, especially coming to the sign of Taurus. But we all a little bit become more sensitive to each other's feelings and emotions. Okay. When I say that, it's like if you are in a room full of people who are just really not in the greatest mood whatsoever, and it's a full moon, especially for you sensitive ones, you're going to be more vulnerable to picking up those things. But if you're in a room full of people who are happy and jolly and having a great time, then you are more susceptible to picking up that wonderful energy. Okay, so it just got really dark in here. Sorry, I'm so dark over here. Now, what's kind of like the biggest deal about this full moon, again, it's a super moon, but it's also the moon exalts in the sign of Taurus. And there's several reasons for that, but to make it simplified, the sign of Taurus is that very calm-natured energy. The sign of Taurus likes things to be calm. The moon up in the sky has a massive influence on our emotions and our moods and our level of receptivity. Okay, so when people are born with their moon in Taurus, certainly not always, because there's things that can modify this, but for the most part, people who are born with their moon in Taurus tend to respond to emotional situations with calmness. Okay, but this full moon is a little bit different. Here's the moon. Right next to the moon is Uranus. Now, Uranus is debilitated in the sign of Taurus because Uranus likes spasmodic, strange, abrupt, electrifying, strange things. Okay, that's what Uranus rules over. Uranus is very will influence things that are very revolutionary. Uranus is like out with the old, in with the new. Okay, now that's in part why I had sort of, I guess, in essence, predicted that Trump would win. And I will say this, I don't think this is done yet. I think there's going to be something that comes up that's going to be even more of a battle with this whole election thing. I don't think it's just going to be this smooth, easy thing where, oh, Trump won, now he's president. I think there's going to be some turbulence over these next few months involving that, especially because at Uranus, this full moon and Uranus are conjunct the part that rules over Donald Trump's midheaven, his career. Okay, but as this moon, it's going to be about a little over 2 hours after this full moon peaks that the moon transits right over Uranus. Okay, so it's like, yeah, the moon's in Taurus, so it's like, oh, a calm nature. But Uranus is whatever the moon is transiting over, like if the, Uranus is right here, here's the moon. When the moon and Uranus go conjunct, that means the moon is distributing more of that celestial body's energy. So the moon will be distributing this sort of rambunctious Uranus energy. Okay, so I don't necessarily think that this is a calm-natured full moon, but it's still that peak of the growth cycle. It very much, you could even include some of that, maybe you've done something that's a little more revolutionary. I know a lot of you out there, including myself, have been working with things like electroculture, things like, electroculture is you're basically working with copper wire, connecting the copper wire to the ground, and you want your plants to be near this copper wire because that copper is picking up the energy from the celestials, really, and giving the plant more power. Okay, to again simplify that. Or maybe you're doing something that's a little bit revolutionary with your finances. Maybe you've been, figuring out wonderful ways to, I know a lot of people are studying trusts and really kind of revolutionizing a lot of things. I don't know enough about that to go into too much detail, but I will say I know a lot of people are figuring out some ways to work around things that involve finances and put themselves in a better financial position. Okay, so there's that. Very, very interesting times. And I also want to say this, is that if you're somebody who likes to have a full moon ceremony, if you're doing the full moon ceremony the night before, then I think you're in the clear. But I don't, with this moon in her fullest form transiting over Uranus, I don't know that I would want to be outside just totally exposing myself to that energy. It's going to be unique for all of us. It's very different for everybody. But I myself, I don't have any earth in my natal chart, like in my actual natal chart. I don't have any earth placements, any earth houses, nothing like that. And so when I know something is going to be a little zappy, I tend to like to protect myself a little bit and make sure that I'm staying extra, extra grounded, protecting myself with all kinds of dark colored gemstones, that sort of thing. Okay, so there's that. Now, trying to decide where we should go next. Let's go to the fact that, let's talk about Neptune. I don't normally talk about Neptune this early, but there's some very strong connections going on with this full moon and Neptune. So let's get into it. So here's Neptune finishing up in the sign of Pisces. That's about another year. To be very specific here, here's Neptune at 27 degrees Pisces. In 2025, Neptune's going to peak into the sign of Aries, but only briefly, and then retrograde back into Pisces. So it's basically there for about a little over a year. So Neptune going through Pisces, Neptune is mystical. Neptune is what influences things like psychic powers. Neptune is what influences mysticism. Neptune is extremely unearthly, and Neptune rules Pisces. So with Neptune going through Pisces, I think it's been since 2012, maybe 2011, we've all been experiencing this Neptune and Pisces transit. All of us have been exposed to this, much more of a tendency for spiritual awakenings. I cannot tell you how many people, I've even talked to astrologers who've been like, yeah, I really had this crazy spiritual awakening over the past few years. I was just on a call with an astrologer recently who was talking about, she was very, very practical and very, to the books and that sort of thing. And even as an astrologer, but then all of a sudden Neptune hits something in her chart, and all of a sudden, poof, she sees the whole spiritual side of life. Okay. So this full moon will be making this approaching sextile aspect, these green lines that are going from Uranus and the full moon over to Neptune. Okay. So that really kind of puts like an extra psychic twist onto this full moon, spiritual twist onto this full moon. And not only that, but here's the sun up here in Scorpio again. And that's an approaching trine. When I say approaching, what I mean is it'll be about 3 days after this full moon that the sun will make an exact trine over to Neptune. And it'll be about 4 hours after this full moon that the moon will be making an exact trine over to Neptune. So this is when we think about the energy of this full moon. Again, this is like we all are more sensitive to each other. It's this peak time of growth and so on and so forth. And then we've got the moon and the sun having this very, very strong, opportunistic and harmonious conversation with this super mystical, spiritual, psychic energy. Okay, so that's something to definitely take into consideration with this full moon. Okay, now, where should we go next? Let's talk about Mars and Pluto. Okay, so here's Mars, who had just entered into the sign of Leo, just like the day before the elections. Okay, Mars in Leo is extreme willpower, extreme willpower. Okay, because Mars is what rules over our physical drive, our adrenals, our muscles. Mars is what makes us go take action. You'll notice a lot of people, if they've got a super strong Mars in their natal chart, they're the people who, you know, they're going to like heavy metal shows, or they're at the gym super early, monster trucks, that's very Martian energy. Okay, the sign of Leo, the motto for the sign of Leo is I will. Okay, so this is extreme willpower. Look to see if you got anything in your natal chart near 3 degrees Leo, because you very well could be experiencing, it very well could be something of a frustration, because Mars can create frustrations, especially going through a really strong fire sign. But it might also be giving you the strength to go finally do that thing that you've been putting off for too long, that sort of thing. But there's this very strong opposition going on with Pluto right here. So Mars often referred to as the planet of war, right? Well, Pluto here is like the Lord, the God of the underworld, okay? Pluto is really what rules over. I love Pluto, as I've said so many times before. I love Pluto because Pluto will influence this deeply spiritual willpower for transformation. Really, Pluto influences the transformational processes. There's other things that influence transformation, the sign of Scorpio, the 8th house, but Pluto is really like out of all those lights in the sky, Pluto is the one that influences, like, oh my God, it's almost like having to go into the depths of a rock bottom experience so that you can transform and be empowered through that experience. Okay, that's what Pluto influences all the time. But it's not like Pluto ever goes away. We're always experiencing all these, celestial bodies. But there's sometimes when they're stronger than others. And Pluto really couldn't be much stronger than he is right now at the 29th degree, 29 degrees and 56 minutes. In fact, it is November 19th that Pluto finally, so 4 days after this new full moon, Pluto finally enters into Aquarius and will be there for 20 years. I mean, Pluto's already peaked into the sign of Aquarius twice, 3 times, but then retrograded back into Capricorn. So this is a big deal. When really any celestial body is at the very end of one zodiac sign and then leading into the very beginning of the next zodiac sign, it tends to work with extreme force. Okay, so there's Pluto working with extreme force, making this opposition with Mars. It's like a battle. It's really almost like a battle. The best way, if you have something in your natal chart near, say, I'm going to say between 29 degrees Capricorn up to 3 degrees Aquarius, wow, you have probably been through an extreme transformation, depending on what it is, but through some, it could have been Mercury, your whole mental function and psyche went through a transformational process. It could be your Mars, where all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I was so lazy most of my life, and now all of a sudden I'm empowered to start working out, or whatever it is. That is a very, very powerful transit that we are all experiencing, but especially if you've got something that's near that 29th degree of Capricorn, or just the first few degrees of Aquarius. And that's going to be going on. What's going to happen here is Mars is going to move along in this sign of Leo and then come back. And we're going to have another opposition with Pluto. That's going to be the end of December, going on to like the first few days of January. And then, of course, Mars is going to have to move forward again, and we'll have that opposition between Pluto and Mars again in April of next year. This is very, very strong energy, especially considering all the other transits and aspects that we will be experiencing through this year of 2025. Really big stuff going on here. My strongest recommendation is that we all do our best to be kind to each other and stay calm and stay grounded, respect one another, and try to avoid the harsh battles, not only for the other person's sake, but for yours as well. Because especially if this is hitting something in your chart, that's very, very aggressive energy coming through. But it could be a really good thing. Okay, now let's see here. We will move on up to Venus here, who has just entered into that sign of Capricorn. So Venus, the ruler of this full moon, okay, Venus, again, she's the planet of love. Venus influences harmony and love and relationships. Venus likes everybody to get along, okay? And she did just enter into that sign of Capricorn. Oh, and I forgot to mention here, Pluto finishing up at the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn is very much the sign of government and authority. So going back to Venus entering into Capricorn here, that might be our saving grace, because Venus is kind of like, hey, calm down, Capricorn energy. I'm here. We're going to make things be okay. And so that could be a really nice thing. If you've got something near 4 degrees Capricorn in your chart, that might be a really beautiful thing. And not only that, but Venus is making a very, very strong square with these nodes. That's going to be going on for about 3 days past this full moon. Venus moves along. So the North Node going through the sign of Aries, we've talked about this a lot. North Node is pumping that energy in through that sign of Aries. It's another aggressive transit that we're all experiencing, okay? Because Aries is the cardinal fire sign. It's the warrior of the zodiac. And that North Node is the dragon's head, and it's pumping fiery energy in. But it's squaring, making a force with this Venusian influence to the sign of Capricorn, the sign of government and authority. And then here we've got the South Node, the drain point, going through the sign of Libra. Now, I've said this so many times, I just cannot wait for these nodes to get out of these zodiac signs. They finally changed signs in January. Personally, so the sign of Libra is very much the sign of justice. It's the sign of harmony. It's the sign of fairness. It's the sign of relationships. Okay, and that South Node is somewhat of a drain point. So it's taking something out of our lives that have to do with that Libra energy away. Okay. But this is also, honestly, especially if you got something near 4 degrees Capricorn in your natal chart, this could be, letting go of that relationship that wasn't working. Hopefully not, but this could potentially be some sort of a dispute with a relationship, something along those lines. But it also really could be a beautiful thing, because really these nodes are very much about energy coming in and then being drained out. So keep that in mind throughout this transit. Really be keeping it in mind. Okay, I've really experienced this growth cycle. Now it really is time for me to let go of the things that are not serving me. Venus squaring those nodes can actually really help to encourage that. Okay, so here we've got Mercury going through Sagittarius, not his favorite sign to be in, but Mercury is what rules over, and there can be beautiful things about Mercury in Sagittarius. I'll explain. So Mercury is, to shorten this up, is how we receive information. And then that information is stored within us. And then Mercury has to find that information for us to bring it back out. Okay, so it's like the intake of information and the outtake of information. Mercury rules the nervous system. And the sign of Sagittarius is the mutable fire sign. I'm a Sagittarius rising, quite familiar with this Saggy energy. It's a lovely energy. It's really like the sign of optimism, but it's Mercury is on basically like overdrive in the sign of Sagittarius, because when I say mutable, I'm talking about very adaptable. The sign of Sagittarius is like, oh, I want to go there. No, I want to go there. Oh, I want to go there. I want to go. Very adventurous energy. But Mercury ruling our nervous system, it's kind of like, oh, I want to go here. I want to go there through our nervous system. But this could potentially be a really good transit for, especially if this is hitting something in your natal chart. If you got something near 16 degrees Sagittarius, you might be drawn to study things, things that you've never learned about before. The sign of Sagittarius loves to seek out wisdom. So that is something that could be going on. Making a fairly strong opposition over here with Jupiter going through Gemini. Oh, I didn't even think about that when I looked at this chart earlier. So as I just mentioned, going into new studies, okay, going into something that you've never really studied before with Mercury going through the sign of Sagittarius. Jupiter going through Gemini puts even more of an influence on that sort of thing. So Jupiter is here, which rules Sagittarius. Mercury is here, which rules Gemini. They're in each other's signs and they're opposing each other. That's an approaching opposition. So the way that I see this is something oppositions can be a difficult aspect, but we can utilize it by integrating them together, using them together. Sign of Gemini, the motto is I think. Jupiter, being Sagittarius's ruler, loves to seek out the wisdom. Okay, so this could, again, be a great time. Look in your chart to see if you got anything near 19 degrees. I'd say anywhere between 15 and 20 degrees, Gemini or Sagittarius. That thing is getting a lot of activity. It might be a little bit of an overstimulation, but at the same time, it could be a really, really good thing for studying, especially new things. Okay, let's see here. Where should we go next? Let's go on over here to Saturn. So Saturn going through Pisces, basically until February of 2026. But Saturn is another one that's going to peek into the sign of Aries and then retrograde back. So we're just kind of being flexible here with describing Saturn going through Pisces. But Saturn, he wants discipline. Saturn and is no longer in retrograde. Hallelujah. Saturn wants discipline and structure. Saturn wants us to take care of our responsibilities. Again, that sign of Pisces is the sign of spirituality. Okay, amongst many other things, it's a sign of oneness. The sign of Pisces is very much like, why can't we all just get along? It's a very emotional and sensitive energy for sure. By no means am I suggesting that everybody who's a Pisces is going to say, why can't we all just get along? But a lot of Pisces do. Okay, and Saturn being that bringer of discipline and responsibilities. Again, this is a fantastic time for, when I say studying new things that you've never really studied before, studying things like astrology, studying things that are of a spiritual nature. But astrology is certainly not just spiritual. Astrology is math. Astrology is truly a language. It's a science. It is not just spiritual. But of course, there's a spiritual side to everything. You could be changing a tire and think of it as a spiritual experience. But regardless, Saturn going through Pisces very well could be like, hey, let's take our spiritual practices very seriously. Let's study things that are of a spiritual nature, something that's of a metaphysical nature. And not only that, but we've got a couple of quintiles going down here to this new moon. Saturn, these pink lines going to the moon and Uranus, is a quintile aspect, which basically can be defined as spiritual in dimension. It's like they're just a hyper spiritual aspect. Okay, so that's also something else. We cover everything I wanted to here. I think so. Chiron retrograding through the sign of Aries. Now, Chiron's training Mercury as well. Okay, so Chiron, the wounded healer, going through Aries, the warrior of the zodiac, the sign of self. As I've said so many times, especially if you have something near 19 degrees Aries in your natal chart, Chiron is begging for you to take action with healing yourself. And again, it's very much dependent on what the thing is. That if you've got Mercury near 19 degrees Aries, then it's like something, maybe wounds from early childhood are coming into your conscious awareness, and it's time to really put some energy towards healing those things. Could be healing them through some kind of a spiritual practice. especially since Mercury has an approaching trine to Chiron. Okay, so it's actually a really beautiful lineup when I think about it. What I do like about this, well, there's not, when we think about this sign of Taurus, again, it's the earth of the earth sign. So we do have some stability there. But it's also a little bit overwhelmed with some very, very mystical and spiritual energy, but also this revolutionary, technological, spasmodic influence that we're receiving from Uranus. But this kind of full moon could potentially, I don't want to give anybody false hopes, but could be the kind of transit that brings some kind of like miraculous healing into our life, especially if we're working with this stuff intentionally. We're setting the intentions to work through it. Okay, so I think I will leave that there. Let's talk about body parts. Okay, so the sign of Taurus basically rules this part of the body. It's kind of has a little bit of an influence on the upper jaw, but it's mostly the lower jaw. The ears, okay, the neck, the throat has an influence on the thyroid. And what can happen, especially if you've got a lot of Taurus energy in your natal chart, a lot of people will end up with they deal with sore throats a lot. And by the way, I know so many people who are getting sick again. I know so many people, something's going around, who've been dealing with sore throats. A really good idea to pay a little extra attention to this area of our body, pay attention, taking care, nurturing this part of our body. Now, for the throat, honestly, I was thinking about this before. I'm like, you know what? Honestly, raw honey, especially if it's local, organic, raw honey, I feel like it's one of the best things we can do to give our throat something that it will appreciate, especially going through the sign of Taurus, because again, Taurus is ruled by Venus. Venus rules sugar. She rules sweets. Okay, so raw honey could be great. Okay, now the thyroid, black walnut hulls can actually, when I say the thyroid, a lot of people who now of course we got to be really, really careful here. I am not a doctor and I'm not trying to offer any kind of medical advice whatsoever. But let's just say statistically speaking, people who've got a lot of Taurus energy, especially like sun and moon in Taurus, something like that, can deal with hypothyroidism. Black walnut hull can actually potentially help pick it up. So you're not dealing with the hypothyroidism. But again, that's not necessarily something we should just kind of take a lucky guess about. You might be dealing with hyperthyroidism. But it's, again, you should check in with your healthcare practitioner. I take black walnut hulls all the time because it's also very strong. It can release parasites. It can kill parasites, get rid of parasites. And that's also something that we can work with on a full moon, especially while the sun is going through the sign of Scorpio. Okay, now also, the ears can have this tendency to get stuffy back here, or like pressure or swelling around the ears. Now for that, cleavers is probably my number one go-to thing. Cleavers they're beautiful, like kind of a sticky plant. It's weird because where I grew up, the cleavers grew all over the place. I had no idea what they were. I just knew these like really sticky plants. I would touch them and feel them and my fingers would stick to it and they'd stick to your clothes as you walked by, that sort of thing. But they're so adorable. They're so cute, these tiny little leaves. But cleavers can be, in a tincture or a tea, can be really good for really kind of reducing any kind of swelling or even especially swelling that's from an infection or something like that, but especially in the throat, neck, ears area. So those are probably the things that I'm going to be doing. I make a cleaver tea and put some raw honey in there. And I always fairly often take my black walnut hulls anyway. Okay, so there's that. Now, gemstones. The dedicated zodiacal birthstone for the sign of Taurus is emerald, which I do not, to this day, I've never owned a real true emerald. Oh boy, I would love a real green emerald. They're pretty expensive though. But the real true green emerald can be incredible for brain stimulation, for somebody who's like sluggish. It could be overstimulation for some people if they got a really, really strong Mercury, if they're like a sun in Gemini and they're Virgo rising or something, that might be a little overwhelming for them to walk around with a green emerald on. But for people who are kind of just slow to move and think, and the nervous system is sluggish, that sort of thing, green emerald can be really, it's like increases the ability to concentrate. And what I'm going off of, like I said, I've never owned a real true green emerald, but this is an ancient study that's called the Upaye system. So in medical astrology, really emerald belongs to Mercury. Mercury rules the nervous system. And even just thinking about it, I totally get it. I totally feel that the green stimulation from a real true emerald. But honestly, I mean, obviously, not everybody's got an emerald laying around. So there's plenty of other stones. I always leave a full extensive list of stones that resonate well with the sign the moon is transiting through in the description below. But I'm going to name some of my favorites here. I'm going to bring out this one that I've brought out several times. This is rose quartz. And this is particularly a massage tool of rose quartz that I love so much. I've actually got a couple of them. Rose quartz is beautiful for especially this sign of Taurus because it's calm. It's such a lovely, and I don't even like pink. Have you guys ever seen me wear pink in any video? I don't think so. Even when I was a little girl, I never wanted to wear pink. I remember my mom getting me a pink bike and being like, what was that? But rose quartz is so beautiful and so lovely and such a calming stone. It's super Taurus energy. Okay, now, I realize I forgot to say something. I'm going to go back to that. This right here is jade. Jade is another one that can be really, really good for all these things. And I get most of my information about these kind of gemstones. The precious gems, I learn more about that from the Academy for Astrological Medicine and a couple other books. I can't think of the name of the books right now. But for things that are more like semi-precious gemstones, I learned more about this from the Encyclopedia of Crystals by Judy Hall. So jade comes in lots of different tones, usually like a green or yellow. Can be another one that's good for the nervous system. This I'd say is more of a calming. I think it was even titled or something named the stone of calm. But jade can also be recognized to bring luck. This is another massage tool, different kind of massage tool. But jade is another really good one. Like I said, I usually, when I write my journal, the hours leading up to the full moon, I, set the intentions. I usually go outside, depending on how cold it is. I go outside, I put my feet on the ground, I write my journal, and I'm really, really setting the intentions. And then when I'm done with that journal entry, I come inside, I put my journal somewhere in the house that just calls to me, and I put my gemstones on top of that journal. Okay, now certainly not everybody's got all these gemstones laying around. You got to start somewhere. Yeah, if you don't have any gemstones, I recommend any kind of, whatever you got. I've told this story before. I kid you not, the first rock mineral I ever worked with, I didn't have any gemstones. I had maybe some jewelry that my mom got me when I was a little kid, that sort of thing, but I didn't have any, crystal quartz or anything like that. So I went out and walked, because I live in the mountains, went out and found just a neat looking rock that was up the driveway a little ways. And that's what I started working with. And then I started setting the intentions and manifesting more of these gemstones into my life because I personally love them. And I feel I don't know if it's just because I'm super sensitive, but I feel them. So that's why I like to work with them. So the last one I want to mention here, this one here is kyanite. So blue kyanite is also really good. Resonates with so many of the zodiac signs. Kyanite is super, super protective. And the reason I wanted to bring this one out is because of that Uranus conjunction with the moon. And again, just a couple hours after the full moon, the moon is going to go exactly conjunct with Uranus. So I feel like something that's just a little protective, not to say we always need protection from Uranus, but Uranus can bring these the most prime example we can think of, the kind of influence that Uranus would bring is, you're in a rush. You got to, oh my gosh, this is the most important meeting ever. And all of a sudden you can't find your keys. Your kid took your keys and hid them or something like that. That's a surprise, an unexpected, usually unwanted surprise from Uranus. But Uranus also really wants freedom. Uranus is, it's let's say you lost your keys or whatever happened with your keys, but then you found out you would have ended up in some terrible, car accident. There was a 30-car pileup. If you would have left when you wanted to, you would have been in that accident, that sort of thing. Uranus can be really, really good for that sort of thing. But just to kind of protect myself from the spasmodic Uranus energy, I like to work with something that's a little bit protective. So again, this is black kyanite, blue kyanite can do well. You can also, again, look in the description below to see if there's any gemstones on that list that you might have laying around there. Okay, the thing I wanted to mention as well is that generally speaking, when it's a full moon in the sign of Taurus, that's like my favorite time to sit down and enjoy a good meal. Like I said, the sign of Taurus, it's very strongly associated with food and it rules the taste buds. This is generally speaking my favorite time. I generally don't eat like a big meal until a little later on. Like I said, this is at 1:28 Pacific time and I'm here in California. So it's, I don't necessarily want to have a big giant meal at 1:30 in the afternoon, but it's like either the night before, especially the night before. Again, a lot of this is going to depend on your own time zone. But for those of you, sitting down and having food that maybe you worked hard to grow or you worked hard to make or you worked hard to be able to have the money to be able to buy the nice food from a nice restaurant, that sort of thing. That's kind of like one of my favorite things to do when we have a full moon in Taurus. But I will say this, I wouldn't necessarily recommend having a big meal right as the moon is crossing over Uranus. So if you want to pay very close attention to the details of this, look to see what time, if you're on the East Coast, then this is going to be at 4:28 p.m. Eastern time, that sort of thing. So you might not want to have a big full meal 2 hours after that, 6:28 p.m. Eastern time, that sort of thing. Just be thinking to yourself, because I don't necessarily think it's the greatest idea to just be filling up our bellies right as the full moon is crossing over Uranus. But the hours before or the night before, that sort of thing, you might find yourself being able to taste the food a little better, that sort of thing. So I wanted to mention that before I ended this recording. I will leave that there. If you would like to schedule an astrology reading, please do visit erinwageastrology.com. I do hope to hear from some of you. And until next time, namaste to all of you.